I want to read with you chapter 2, verse 19, down through verse 23. Part of the Christmas narratives that Matthew, of course, is giving to us, and we've been looking at some of those in the Christology course itself on Thursday night, which we're going to continue this coming Thursday as well. This last Thursday, we're looking at the incarnation as found in verse 18, and we're going to continue that. We only just barely started on looking at what the incarnation is all about. But as he gives this first narrative in chapter 1, verse 18, he moves then into the second narrative, which is in chapter 2, verse 1, which is the wise men scene. And it's the only place, of course, we have the story of the wise men. And then you move into verse 13, the drama begins to thicken, and you would think with the coming of Christ there would be peace and glory and everything would be wonderful. But I have discovered when Jesus moves, things begin to get upset. Trouble begins to happen, disturbance, and obviously that was true at his birth. So when Jesus came, of course, it stressed a lot of people out. One of them was Herod, and he was no doubt in my mind demon-possessed, and the devil used him to the height and plotted and planned, and of course, the wise men were to come back and tell him exactly where the Christ was. And by this time, you realize he had moved into a house and was probably between 1 and 2 years of age. So he's a toddler by this time that you get into the scene of the wise men. And the reason we know that is because in chapter 2, down in verse... what verse is it? Herod got the wise men together and actually interrogated them. Verse 7. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. See, he was really interested in the original appearance of the star. That would give him the timing of this thing. And then when he came to order an edict to kill the baby boys, which he wanted to include Christ, he killed every baby boy up to the age of 2, based upon when the star first appeared, which gives you the indication that he was covering all of his bases, getting the time span in which when the child was born, assuming he was born when the star appeared. So after he gave the edict, of course, to slaughter the baby boys, the angel of the Lord appeared, and he was rescued by fleeing into Egypt land. And now that's all gone. Herod is dead. And in verse 19, this fourth narrative is given to us. Now when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the young child's life are dead. Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. And when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. I wouldn't have to spend any time at all trying to convince you tonight that of the importance of childhood and the impact that you have on a child, and that the prime time of their life when they're being shaped and patterns are being established and thought processes are being rooted is during this childhood period. And anybody who's been a parent is concerned about those early days of the child that you have in your home and how they're shaped. In fact, there's become evidence that even when the babe is in the womb, the mother is influencing that baby. If the mother is a perpetual liar and just tells lie after lie after lie during the 9 months that the babe is in the womb, that child has that ingrained into his system, into his mind process. What goes on in the mother begins to go on in the child, and that influences and shapes. So not only the childhood, but the very pregnancy of the woman herself becomes significant in what's going on in influencing children. Anybody who knows anything about child evangelism has heard the statistics about when people get saved, when they accept Christ. They are the percentage of people, if you, and I don't have the statistics tonight to give to you, but it's just large that most of us got saved when we were kids. The highest percentage of people give their life to Jesus when they're children. When they get to be teens, it's really cut down. When they get to be young adults, it's really cut down. When they get to be middle-aged, it's really cut down. When you're a senior adult, it's a miracle of God, but it always is. But it's absolutely almost impossible. Very few people get saved when they're senior adults. Which tells you that this childhood thing really matters. Really matters. I was raised with a statement, we heard it all the time as I was growing up. I don't know if they're still saying or not, but the Catholics said, give us a child for the first 7 years of his life and we'll have him forever. Because they knew if they could grab a hold of that kid during those 7 years and what they would implant into the mind and in the inner heart, that would stick. Because those are the influential years. Now, you would think that anybody who knows that, any father who realizes that, would go all out to guard his children. Isn't that why some of you do homeschooling? Isn't that why Christian schools begin to spring up? Because we were scared to death of that period of time, which is so crucial and so absolutely important and matters so much. We got to protect and guard and keep from, and we got to see that the right things are influence them, and that is so important. You would think that any decent father would say, I'm going to protect and do the best I can to keep everything that's not as it should be, and every evil influence and every awful thing. I'm going to do my best to protect, to put a shield around my child. Any decent father would do that, wouldn't he? Which brings up the issue of our passage. Again, it's the fourth narrative. And the fourth narrative is filled with this Nazareth thing. It's really interesting. Nazareth. How did they end up in Nazareth? Well, you realize that the edict had been given and the baby boys were slaughtered, and the angel of the Lord appeared again to Joseph and said, hey, get the child out of here. And in the middle of the night, Joseph, no pictures off the wall, no getting ready, no packing, just, hey, bare essentials, and just put Mary on a mule and Jesus in her arms, and off they went and traveled in the night hours just to get out of there, just to spare his life. It was essential. They're in Egypt land. We don't know how long they were in Egypt land. They could have been there, most scholars say, about 6 months. We don't know if they stayed in a motel, whether they rented a house, whether he got jobs. We do know this, that the gold, frankincense, and myrrh of the gifts of the wise men supported them during that time of exile. So they had money. So they're in Egypt land. Now Herod, who's the key figure in all of this, is in terms of the threat. Now Herod is dead, and everybody's glad. He was a mean, nasty, the awful things he did. He was demonic. He had no thought for human life at all, which is evident in the fact that he could create a decree that would kill baby boys at random, just soldiers marching through the city of Bethlehem and its surrounding districts and grabbing a hold of baby boys and throwing them against the wall. I mean, the fact that that could be done tells you what kind of a thought process he has. He's dead. Everybody's glad about it. Now that he's dead, the threat is over. The angel of the Lord shows up again to Joseph and says, hey, and the instruction, as you note, is in verse 20, arise, take the young child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. You realize that's really broad. Land of Israel. That's all the way from Judah to Samaria up into Galilee. That's a broad area. Hey, help yourself. There's no detailed instruction on where to go. Just return, just come back. Now, it doesn't say so in this scripture, but every bit of logic tells you, and there is some indication to it, but every bit of logic tells you that where they were going to go was back to Bethlehem. You realize they'd gone to Bethlehem for the census time because they were required, because they were of the lineage of King David. So they had to go back to Bethlehem, the city of David. So when they went back there, no room in the inn, that whole innkeeper thing, all that took place, the Christ child was born there. They stayed. They did get a house, obviously. They began to raise Jesus in that environment of Bethlehem. He got jobs. No doubt Joseph had jobs. He got contracting jobs. Can you imagine? He was right in the middle of a job when he took off for Egypt land. I mean, this is terrible. I mean, there was the guy, he just finished the job the day before, and the guy was to pay him that day, and he left him. I mean, that guy owes him money. Everything tells you that when the angel of the Lord said, go back, where are we going to go back to? Hey, let's go back. Maybe they haven't rented the house yet. Maybe we can get that thing. We could get our pictures off the wall. That would be good. I could collect the money from the guy who owes it to me. Yeah, I finished the job. He still owes me that money. Hey, we ought to do that. So no doubt they decided we'll go back to Bethlehem. It made sense. It's where they had developed their friendships. They had their life established there. It's a good environment for Jesus. I mean, it's right next to Jerusalem, you understand, 5 miles from Jerusalem, the holy city. I mean, it's the place where the temple is. It's where the schools are. I mean, the educated people are here. I mean, this is where they really keep the laws of God. This is where it's pure, not far out, it's pure. This is the place to be. This would be a great environment for Jesus. So they travel. As they get close to Bethlehem, they probably stopped at McDonald's to get a Big Mac, and as they're sitting in the booth, you know how preachers are, there's a preacher sitting there, and he's talking about Archelaus. Who's this Archelaus guy? Well, Archelaus is the son of King Herod. King Herod's the one that pronounced the edict to kill the baby boys. He's the guy who's mean and nasty and was demon-possessed. So he had 3 sons, actually. So they took the kingdom that King Herod had and sliced it into thirds and gave each kid a slice. So now the guy who's over the area of Bethlehem is Archelaus. And that preacher in the next door, you know, big mouth, everybody can hear him. He's talking at McDonald's, and as he's beginning to talking over a cup of orange juice, not coffee, lo and behold, as he's talking about how terrible Archelaus is. Just about as bad as his dad. Oh, mercy. And Joseph gets scared. For it says in verse 22, and when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father, he was afraid to go there. So he's scared to death. Oh, maybe we made the wrong choice. Maybe we shouldn't have come back here. Oh, this is awful. Maybe this is not worth it. Well, where are we going to go? Well, I don't know. Well, how are we going to, what should we do? So they decided to ask God what the deal was. And it's really interesting. There's a whole sermon on this in itself. And being warned by God in a dream. And the idea of warned there, that Greek word is different than all the other times in the other warnings that came. The Greek word there literally is a word that has the idea of in answer to a request. So this tells you that by this time, they have had such a relationship going on with God and revelation from God that they felt comfortable of, let's ask him. So they ask, well, where do you want us to go, God? And God came in a dream, angel of the Lord, no doubt, appeared in a dream and he turned aside into the region of Galilee. So obviously the angel said, hey, don't go back to Archelaus, don't go back to Bethlehem. Go where? Go to Nazareth. So the reason they're going to Galilee, back to Nazareth, is because they were distinctly told to go there by the angel of the Lord. You got to get that. They were distinctly told to go back to Nazareth, raise the child in Nazareth. Nazareth is the place. In fact, he tells you at the end of verse 20 that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, plural. Now, if you try to find that, you won't find it. But obviously, Matthew knew where they were. The prophets, there were prophets who prophesied that Jesus would be raised in Nazareth. So all of this was set up a long time ago in prophecies. Now the angel has said, go there, so you don't have any choice biblically but to look at this and say, Jesus is going to be raised in Nazareth because God wanted it to be that way. God the Father decided it should be that way. Oh, maybe you don't know about Nazareth. It's a small town, about 5,000 in population. It's a trade route. One of the major trade routes of the world. Comes right out of Egypt, right down through. Doesn't come down to Judah. No, Judah's protected. No bad people going through Judah. They all come down through Nazareth. They stop at Nazareth. Nazareth makes its living off of this trade route. Do you know what a trade route is like? All these crazy people, all these people who dress strange, all these people of different colors, all these people with different languages, different religions, all these strange people come, stop there. Jesus is going to be exposed to all of this. Because he's raised in Nazareth. This is not a good influence. Oh, maybe you didn't know. Not only was this a major trade route, was Nazareth a major trade route, but also it was the home of the Roman garrison for the whole region. In other words, when Rome came in, conquered a territory, they left behind a garrison, which was 600 to 1,000 soldiers in an area to police the thing. So this was the home base of basically all of Galilee, the Roman garrison. Do you know what kind of an influence? You ever lived in a military town? Not only that, but a Roman garrison? I mean, come on. Do you know the kind of parties they must have had? Their wives aren't around. I mean, they're here on their own. They're living in barracks. They go into town for a good time. Come on, can you imagine what was going on in that town? This is not good. And Jesus is raised in the middle of all that evil influence. Can you imagine what he saw as a kid? What he experienced, the words. He's just walking down the street, and the words that the language that's spilled out. Can you imagine what kind of influence? No father who had a choice would want his son raised in Nazareth. What is this? Why would that happen? How could this take place? Nazareth? Let me give you the region of Nazareth. You need to know your biblical geography. Down here is Judah, of course. This is a large place down here. Right in the middle of that is Jerusalem. Oh, just makes you want to stand. The holy city. I mean, you just want to take your shoes off just when you walk in the city gates. I mean, this is the place. I mean, the Israelite men sing in the temple, and it just gives you goosebumps all over. This is where the sacrifices are made. This is where the doctrine is pure, down here. Then you got right above that, you got Samaria, the province of Samaria. Judea down here, Samaria right here. Nobody wants to mess with Samaria. You know, they're a mixed race, and they believe this, that, and the other, and it's all combined. And oh, what a mess. Nobody messes with them. In fact, Judeans down here, when they want to go up here to Galilee, they don't go, they go miles out of their way because they don't want to go through. Even don't get the dust on me. Don't even want their dust on me. So Samaria's a mess. Then you go up here and you got Galilee. It's about 80 to 100 miles up here if you go straight. This is Galilee. See how far it is from the temple? Can you imagine what kind of doctrines they got up here? By the time it gets up here, can you imagine the kind of compromises that are made and the kind of things that take place and the kind of religion and worship that goes on? I mean, nobody, come on. If you had a choice, wouldn't you raise your child right down here in Bethlehem? This would be the place. You wouldn't, come on, any decent father wouldn't say, I want my kid up here. If you had a choice. I mean, if you knew better. And when you're talking about God the Father, good night. Do we need to advise him? I mean, what's the problem here? Couldn't he have set up a whole different? And the reputation of the people up here, oh, it's awful. It's awful. I mean, it's worse than awful. Galileans are, see, down here, they're educated, they're refined, they're, music, classical music. You got all of this. Oh, it's just, wow. It's just a great society of decent kind of people. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. You got all these decent kind of, good people. You can leave your doors unlocked. Up here, oh, brother. They got dirt under their fingernails. They're uneducated. They're comic book level. They listen to country and western music. They're just... The language down here, the language is cultured. They talk good English. Up here, slang, accent, it's awful. They say sangers instead of singers, and it's just awful. They can't even talk. You can hardly understand them. It's like altogether different language. And you look at them and say, how do you get that out of that word? They're just totally uneducated. See, if you got a search committee looking for a new pastor for your church, where do you go? Down here in Judea. If you're looking for somebody to clean out the toilets, where do you go? Galilee. See, that's the class. Come on. Anybody who's a decent father is going to say, want my kid raised down here in the cultured, refined influence, not, brother. See, nobody down here respects anybody up here. But it's a little worse than that. Because do you realize what happened? John the Baptist was pointing a finger saying, behold the Lamb that takes away the sin of the world. Standing beside him were two disciples. We studied this. Standing beside him were two disciples of John the Baptist. And he said, that's the Lamb, go follow him. So they left and went with Jesus all day long. In fact, they went then and got Peter. Andrew got Peter and some other, and then they got some Nathaniel in on it. And when they came to Nathaniel, these guys, and remember, these two disciples and Peter are all from up here. Galilee. They're all from up here. So, and Nathaniel's from up here. And when they got a hold of Nathaniel and said, we found the Messiah. Where's he from? Galilee. Nathaniel said, what? Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Now, you can understand the people down here criticizing this up here, but when a guy up here criticizes it, so evidently Galileans looked at Nazareth and said, oh, brother. Even the Galileans didn't appreciate Nazareth. Even the Galileans looked down on it. The Galileans all knew that Nazareth was the slums. It was the, brother, of Galilee. Jerome, who was a church father in about 400, said that Nazareth was a slang word used for anybody who was from an obscure or hidden region. In other words, it would be like we would say, oh man, he's sure a hick. So they would say, not he's sure a hick, they would say, man, he's sure a Nazarene. See, this doesn't make any, if you're a good father and you want the best for your son and you want to protect him from, if these years of growing up are crucial and you got a choice, you're not going to choose, you're going to choose What's going on? Again, do we need to advise God? What's the problem? Now, all of this is proved in Nazareth rebellion, because you know Jesus showed up there in his home city, Nazareth, twice to preach. And the first time they got so upset with him, that they wouldn't believe. Hey, we've seen you play, we saw you make mud pies. We've seen you. We've seen you with your buttons ripped off your shirt. Hey, we know you. Don't come around here and try to. And he could do no mighty deeds no mighty miracles in their town because of their unbelief, because they just wouldn't buy it. The second time he came back, he preached a sermon that so upset them that they decided they were going to kill him. They got together and took him out to a hill and were going to push him over. This is awful. This is Nazareth. That's the kind of town they are. That's the kind of thought process they have. That seems to be what's going on. And you look at that and say, what could why would you, no decent father would ever if he had a choice. Doesn't God have a choice? Couldn't he directed this another way? Why would he? And it isn't that just Jesus was born in Bethlehem and then went there to be raised in Nazareth. It was that it became, I want you to get this, it became his identification. Do you realize that Jesus could have legitimately addressed himself as from Bethlehem? Where are you from? Bethlehem. He didn't have to say Nazareth, because he was born in Bethlehem. He could have been, instead of a Nazarite, he could have been a Bethlehemite. He could have legitimately done that. And he could have identified himself with Bethlehem. Yeah, right next to Jerusalem, 5 miles. He could have done that, but he didn't. Do you realize he identified himself? He identified himself with Nazareth. Interesting. If you go to Luke chapter 2, verse 39, you'll find out that Nazareth was the hometown of both Mary and Joseph. So there's history there. Luke 2:39 says, so when they had performed all things according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth. See, they'd come to Jerusalem right after the birth of Christ for this whole thing to take place, and they returned then to Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth, which is really, really interesting, because that's where Mary and Joseph were from. It was their hometown. You realize that this is so strong that the conception of Jesus took place in Nazareth. He was conceived in Nazareth. Luke chapter 1, verse 26. Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth. This town we're talking about. Good night. We've already read in chapter 2, verse 23, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. So all of this was laid out with prophecy. If you go to Luke chapter 4, verse 16, so he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up. Raised in Nazareth. See, they don't leave you any wiggle room on any of this. If you go to the crucifixion, isn't this interesting? John 19:19. Now Pilate, this is not just Israelites that recognize Jesus is from Nazareth. The pagan world that was around the culture, they also recognized Jesus as from Nazareth. And in John 19:19, now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth. Interesting. Pentecost had happened. You remember studying this. Pentecost took place, and 3,000 to 5,000 Jews are saying, what on earth is going on? Peter stands up and says, I'll explain it to you. And he starts the body of his sermon with this statement, Acts 2:22. Men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth. You'll remember the study we're doing on Sunday morning, I hope. You remember. Acts 3:6. Peter goes to the lame beggar, grabs him by the hand, in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Isn't that interesting? Do you realize that the Saul of Tarsus has got papers in his hands? He's riding down the Damascus road. He's going to go and slaughter Christians and put them in chains. He's persecuting the church. The bright light comes, knocks him off his horse. He says, Lord, what's going on? Who are you? You know what the answer was? Acts 22, verse 8. So I answered, who are you, Lord? And he, Jesus, said to me, I am Jesus of... So you can't say this is a title that's pushed on him. This is a title he embraced. He called himself that. Nazareth, this awful town, Nazareth, this rebellious town, Nazareth, this awful influence, Nazareth, with all these wild parties, Nazareth, with all this bad language, Nazareth, with all these abusive people, Nazareth, with all these dysfunctional families, Nazareth, with all of this. Who would want to raise their kid there? And if you did raise him there, wouldn't he get out of there as fast as he could and identify himself with something else? Why would you identify yourself with that city? I want to propose to you an answer. It's not about a city. It's about a style. Nazareth fits, think about it, Nazareth fits the style. Well, what style is it? Oh, you'll never guess. It's the cross style. It's the cross style. Nazareth fits that style. Nazareth fits that style. Well, I understand the cross as an event. What if it's not just an event? What if the cross is the very nature of the man himself? What if the cross is the very essence of his thought process? What if the cross isn't just something to go through like an operation getting your appendix out? What if the cross is the very way of living? What if it's the way you look at things? What if the cross is the very pattern by which you establish all of your activities? What if the cross is the way that you approach every scene and incident in your living? What if the cross is the very determining factor of your attitude? What if the cross is not just some, oh yeah, he died for me and I get off scot-free? What if the cross is literally the nature of the heart of God that literally permeates the inner being and takes over your system and gives you a new eyesight so you begin to live out the cross style, the style of the cross day in and day out, and all of your relationships begin to sense it and feel it? What if that's what this is? See, the cross, as you know, was at the end of his life. So what was going on at the beginning of his life? The cross. How do you get that? The incarnation. You remember what the incarnation is, Thursday night class. The second member of the Trinity, who is God, leaped off his throne and pushed aside everything he had as God and became a babe in a manger. How do you calculate that? What was that like? Think of what he had as God. Think of being in the prime number one in charge position. Think of, wow, creative force coming out of you. You can think and it happens, man. Think of all the glory around you. Think of the comfort that you've got. Think of everything that's yours as God. And think of that in comparison to set all that aside and become a man who's going to be told what to do. Think of being a God who knows the future and becoming a man who, what's going on? Think of being God who has omnipower, omnipotence, all power, and nothing can come against you, and being a man that you can take out a nail. What would you call that? It's the Nazareth syndrome. It's that right there. It's the same pattern, you know. So the cross wasn't just at the end of his life. The cross was at the beginning of his life. It was wrapped up in the very nature of the incarnation. In fact, it wasn't just in the nature of the incarnation. It was contained within his birth. Hey, a king is born. That's the whole wise men scene. A king is born, man. They came looking for a new king. Where would you expect to have a new king? Find a new king? Palace. Silk sheets. Princes looking around. An audience of refinement. The best doctors in the house. Where do you find this king? A stable? Oh, come on. See, we glorify that. We drag a stable into our churches, you know, and put straw on the floor, on the carpet. Good night. We think it, make it. Come on, this is a smelly stable. Smells like manure. You got cows, you got dust and must and... If you were a father, is that what you'd choose? Well, what's that all about? It's the Nazareth syndrome. It's the same pattern. It's the cross at the beginning of his ministry, of his life. It's the essence of what it's all about. And you look at this whole thing, not only his birth, but do you realize that the whole temple scene, as you get into it, the temple, you realize, was a scene where the handicapped and the sick and those folks couldn't come. They were not allowed there. In fact, they weren't even allowed in the court of the Gentiles, so they were blockaded. So because they, obviously, if you're sick, you got a problem, spiritual problem. God isn't looking on you with favor. And if you're handicapped, oh, brother, who did sin? You or your parents. Somebody messed up big time, because that's why you are the way you are. So they weren't included, see. God wouldn't bless them. What obviously wasn't blessing them, so they weren't included. Isn't it interesting that Jesus' church, when you went down to the Jesus church, you know what his crowd was full of? People who had PhDs in theology. You know, they were a bunch of sick people, handicapped folks, mentally off people, demon-possessed folks. That was his whole crowd. Isn't Jesus smart enough to attract some decent people? Well, what's that all about? It's the Nazareth syndrome. It's this thing. See, it's not just, the cross is not just at the end. The cross is at the beginning and all the way through the entirety of his ministry. In fact, the whole kingdom idea is all wrapped up in that. When he was told about right hand and left hand, can my boys have the right hand and the left hand? He gave a discourse on the kingdom that said, if you want to be great, become a servant. If you want to be first, become a slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to serve, to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom. Can you imagine the very reason for being born? The very essence for this whole thing is all wrapped up in this Nazareth syndrome, this cross style. See, it fits. It fits. So what's happening at the end of his ministry in terms of a cross is happening at the beginning of his ministry. It was all the way through. The whole kingship business is that. They turned him over to the soldiers in a praetorium. Wasn't it interesting? Again, the praetorium was the barracks of the garrison, which is 600 to 1,000 soldiers. And it was fun time for them, man. They got him out, and they had him in a big circle, and they surrounded him as a circle, and they set him on a chair, and they blindfolded him, and they took a stick, and they plaited together a crown of thorns. Well, he's a king, come on. He needs a crown of thorns. He needs a crown. It's a crown of thorns. They put it on his head, took the stick and beat on his head, said, who did that? Who did that if you're so smart? Because they had blindfolded him. This is our king, folks. This is our royal, all-conquering, mighty king who's got it all together. A king ought to have a scepter. Oh, we'll give him a scepter. Not a gold, silver scepter. We'll give him a reed weed scepter. He's king of the reed weeds. That's our king. That's what he's all about. That's this powerful, almighty king of ours. Hey, he's our king. He ought to be anointed. Let's anoint him. How are we going to anoint him? With our spit. We spit on him. This is our... Do you see that matches the whole thing of a stable and cows and smell of manure and shepherds? This was the whole deal, folks. From beginning to end, there was only one thing going on in the life of Jesus, and that was this. Spill your life out. Give yourself up. Never think about yourself. Well, Manley, how does that apply to me? What do you want out of me? What does that mean to you? How does that fit into my calculation? What would that do to my life? Do you realize every time I have to have my way, I'm violating this thing? Do you realize every gripe and complaint that comes out of my lips violates this? Do you realize that every time I make judgments about somebody and put them down, do you realize that? It kicks this in the teeth. Do you realize that every time I adjust things to make myself comfortable, you realize every time I cease to think about being redemptive and reaching out and pulling in, you realize every time I'm pushing away and I'm violating. And I'm not just violating an event, I'm violating the whole style from beginning to birth, all the incarnation, all the way through to the cross thing. I'm violating it. Every time I have a right to speak my piece. Do you realize you have no rights? Do you realize the demand of rights is the opposite of this? Well, I got a right. No, you don't. Well, I earned it. I got it. No, you don't. Our forefathers were wrong. I've got a right to happiness. No, you don't. No, you don't. don't. Well, I got a right to a little peace. No, you don't. I got a right to go where I want to. No, you do not. This is your right. This is the redemptive nature of God. Isn't it interesting? When I demand my peace, I've got a right to peace. I don't have it. When I give up that right, woo, I get it. Isn't that? Oh, I got a right to live my life, and then I'm dead. And when I give up the right to live my life, woo, I live forever. Isn't that amazing? Oh, I got a right to be happy. Oh, when you give that right up, whoa, guess what? You end up happy. Oh, I got a right to have my own way. When you give that up, isn't it interesting how you get your own way? Oh, wow. This is the Nazareth deal. This is the Nazareth deal. Jesus, Hebrew writer said, you were superior, you were greater than angels, greater than the high priest, greater in the sacrifice. Everything about you was greater. And he encouraged us. Oh, he encouraged us to go forth and embrace you outside the camp, bearing your reproach. The sins of Israel were confessed over a lamb, and that lamb was slaughtered, and the dead body that contained the sins of Israel was taken outside the camp and burned. You died on a cross outside the camp. We are encouraged to go outside the camp and bear your reproach. You told us in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are you when they revile you. I am so puny, so wimpy. People look at me at cross-eyed and I get upset. I don't have one mark on my flesh. The Apostle Paul said, oh, I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Haven't had one whipping. Don't have a scar. And my life is full of complaint, bitterness, critical, judgmental. Forgive me, Jesus. Bring me to a manger, to a babe who was born to die. Bring me to a nature. Could I be filled with your nature? Could you possess me until through me your redemptive life could be spilled in my world? Oh God, save me from myself. Save me from my own desires. Save me from my own will. Save me from my own rights. Save me from speaking my peace. Save me from my peace. Save me from my own drives, my own body drives. Save me from the satisfying of my own selfish, silly wants. Save me from my own thinking. Let me be possessed by you alone. Heads are bowed. Any candidates tonight for such an experience? Anybody want to give up their rights? Anybody want to set aside the right to your own opinion, the right to your own life, the right to do what you want to do? Anybody want to give that up? Anybody want to take on the nature of Jesus? Oh, Peter said, we have become partakers of the divine nature. Anybody willing to be raised in Nazareth? Who will lose their lives for the sake of something bigger than themselves? Where is the young person that will throw themselves away, risk everything they are, for the nature and the mind and the heart of God to do something through? Moments of seeking,